Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, starring Jean Arthur, James Stewart, Claude Rains, Harry Carey, H.B. Warner, Baloo Bondi, Edward Arnold, Guy Kibbe, and Thomas Mitchell, directed by Frank Capra. Now, this movie did come out in 1939, and why am I reviewing this movie as well as some other Columbia classics? Well, I own the 4K versions of the Columbia classics, so I'm going to go back to the ones that are on volume 1, which is, let me see if I'm not mistaken, this movie, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, to Lawrence of Arabia, to Doctor Strangelove, to Gandhi, to A League of Their Own, all the way to Jerry Maguire, and I keep going until this summer by ending it with Volume 4, which is coming soon on 4K in February, but let's just get straight into this movie, as I have seen this a few times in my life. There's a reason it's a classic. Let's get into it. The movie begins with a wonderful piece of American history music, while the credits roll in this beginning as it felt very patriotic. Senator Samuel Foley passes away as it's big news for the United States of America, while they look for an immediate replacement, while Jim Taylor, played by Edward Arnold, talks about who will be the senator with Senator Joseph Payne, played by Claude Rains, and at first they pick Harris Miller, and they want someone else like the children wants them to pick Jefferson Smith, played by James Stewart, as he's their greatest story ever made, and the dialogue works tremendously while the kids of Hubert Happy Hopper criticize as they work him as they want him to choose Jefferson Smith, and Happy goes to the home of Jefferson and recruits him as a senator. And the cinematography works quite well despite this coming from 1939, as this is a well-made movie with patriotic American heart. Jefferson's father Clayton worked for the American government, and he brings up how Joe Payne is the greatest man ever when his father worked for him. At the time for James Stewart's lines in this are as well written, in my opinion. Jefferson goes to Washington, D.C. on train, and as he arrives with Senator Payne and meets his wife and daughters, Senator Payne, as well as Jim and Joe and Carl Cook, I'm guessing is who that is, with them, and Jefferson takes off on his own on a bus where they can't find him. Jim calls his assistant Saunders, played by Jean Arthur, while Jefferson takes a bus detour to all of Washington, D.C., and that shot of the Lincoln Memorial is such a beautiful shot, and eventually he gets to his own office building. As he arrives, he meets Saunders by a brief misunderstanding, and she calls her boss Senator Payne, while Diz Moore is in the office, and the dialogue by Jefferson is funny in an awkward way in this scene, but he learns he has a private office as Saunders puts him in a taxi cab with her, taking him to her boss's. And I really like the beautiful locations where this movie was filmed in Washington, D.C., and I've been there before in my life. It's been just a little over 20 years, sure, but I remember how interesting and patriotic it is. Jefferson takes pictures and has interviews with reporters and is considered not government material, as he's been called a clown on the newspaper. While Senator Payne sees in the newspapers Saunders is thinking of quitting his office, and she takes Jefferson to a courthouse of the Senate and sits with the senators thanks to a little boy named Richard Jones. And Jefferson is accused for not being government material, and the Senate scene is a lot of fun. Jefferson asks around who reported the story of his first interview and goes after Nosy and wants the newspaper to tell the truth about who Jefferson Smith is. They laugh at him, and goes to Senator Payne and stop the tabloids from lying to the world, and has a brief conversation with one of the daughters, Susan. While it felt awkward, sure, as he keeps dropping his hat, which is funny to me. Jefferson and Saunders talk about what to say to the press for a while, as he wants to bring up the lighting up the Capitol pole, amongst other things. And we learn Saunders' first name, which happens to be Clarissa. And I don't mind this movie being black and white. This was released in 1939, as Jefferson Smith is honorable, unlike some people in today's politics, which I'm not going to plan on naming names at this point in the show. We get back to the Senate sequence, and Jefferson wakes up as he wants to make a proposal and reads a speech while the other senators are laughing at him. And the press who wronged Jefferson runs out of the Senate room while the kids and everyone cheers and claps for what he said. And Senator Payne thinks about suing Jefferson. For what reason? For what he wants again. And the scenes in the Senate are, like I said, a lot of fun. Jefferson gets the press on him and has letters to read thanks to his proposal, while Susan calls Saunders and says her father is planning on taking him out for lunch, for example. And I get the impression Saunders doesn't like Susan too much, as Susan's father is Saunders' boss, and Dismore talks with Saunders as she's still thinking about quitting and wants to get married and on that very night, and they talk about some ground rules while they're married and walk out of the restaurant, which was amusing. Saunders quits on Jefferson and says to him the politics world is not the world he belongs in and tells him to go home, which was a tad bit odd, while Dismore is there to see the whole thing while Jefferson talks with Senator Payne about things he wants to ask questions about, and Jim asks Jefferson to his office to tell him he's being sued by Senator Payne, doesn't want to hear the pain as he walks out of the room, and he likes Jefferson that he decides to leave the room while Jefferson wants to build a dam somewhere in a creek. While he goes to Senator Payne's office and tells him Jim is a liar about telling the other men what to do, and these scenes are well shot in my opinion. We get into the Senate meeting, and Senator Payne says Jefferson is unworthy to be senator, while everybody else leaves, and Senator Payne tells lies about Jefferson's proposal. If people decide not to vote Jefferson into the Senate after he signed a contract that he didn't sign to begin with. And Jefferson runs out of the room, and after Senator Payne lied about it, and this is part of the reason why I like movies where people talk a lot in a political way, in a political world, I mean, like this movie is. And at the same time, it reminded me of a Simpsons episode where Lisa goes to Washington with her family and overhears a couple of government people lie. So Lisa exposes the truth about the politicians. So I was having a little flashback to that episode in particular. Jefferson goes to a place where Saunders meets with him and tries to find a way to expose the truth from the other senators. And this movie is beautifully shot, and so is the scene, in my opinion. Another senator meeting occurs, and Jefferson comes in, and the other senators, want him out, while the people from upstairs wish for him to speak, and he does, and he still gets mocked, and tells the Section 40 agreement is wrong, and Senator Payne accuses Jefferson for blackmail, while Jefferson wants Jim out of the Senate, but giving him a week about Jefferson's politics versus Jim's politics. But the other senators choose not to listen to Jefferson at this point, as the way they don't believe what the book says, as that they bring the rest of the Senate back in the room, and Saunders tells the news to write about what's happening with Jefferson versus Senator Payne, as it's big news, and I'm having fun with the movie at this point. Jim tells Senator Payne to go to the Senate himself to stop Jefferson versus Jim, as the Senate wants to go against Jefferson, while Jefferson wants to tell the truth about the corrupt politicians. And we move on to the Senate once again, and Jefferson talks about how he doesn't care for the corrupt government, and their rules wants to build the dam. Wants to build the dam on a creek. And I swear people were just ignoring him the whole time and wants to know if they still have faces, which was humorous. Jefferson gets a note from Saunders saying he's right, and Jim wants the newspapers to not side with Jefferson, while Saunders prints the truth on her newspapers as it exposes Jim while everybody is asleep, and Jefferson reads the book of the government, and all the boys deliver newspapers while Jim gets summoned to get after their newspapers off the streets, and anybody agreeing with Jefferson getting hosed down and getting hurt, no thanks to Jim in the first place, as we get to one more Senate scene, and Saunders gets in the room while Jefferson discusses rights all around the world, as Jefferson gets letters from people around the world, and he learns about lost causes and looks at Senator Payne and while making a speech about being the light and how much he'll fight it off. As he briefly faints, Senator Payne is exposed and he runs out and confesses the truth about Jim and Senator Payne doing the wrong things in this country. Because they think it's not illegal, which sounds like President Richard Nixon in 1977, as Jefferson won the case and everyone cheers, and the climax is great as well as this whole movie from start to finish. Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 8.5 out of 10. This movie is very well made as the dialogue works great, and James Stewart's lines in this movie are well written in my opinion, and the cinematography works quite well as this movie is well made and with a patriotic American heart, which is honorable, unlike some people on the TV I've heard about who I won't name names at this point. The movie is beautifully shot despite being in black and white, but remember, this movie came out in 1939, and I didn't mind it myself, and I really enjoyed seeing Washington D.C. As I've been there, but it's been a little over 20 years, but this movie shoots it beautifully. The movie was fun, and it's once again well shot, well made, and it works great even today. And this is a solid recommendation for today's politics reasons. And this was a pretty good, solid movie in my opinion. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time I will be back with Lawrence of Arabia. I'm looking forward to that one. And until then, let's do the statue.